Welcome to the wonderful world of wine. We are your hosts, Mark Lenzi and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. Our program is supported by Franklin Public Radio, and you can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the wonderful world of wine. How are you, Kim?
I'm doing great. How about yourself, Mark?
Everything is good, Kim. Another episode where we have a special guest. Today we have Jennifer Simonson. Jennifer, how are you today?
Doing great, Mark and Kim. Thank you.
It's great to have you. And for all our listeners out there, we always like to say how we find our guests. There was an article that Jennifer wrote, and it was in France44.com. Jennifer writes a wine blog. It is called, well, it's a book and wine blog called the Book-Worm.blog. And Jennifer, many of our listeners, I'm sure out there, enjoy reading a book, drinking wine. And I know Kim and you are going to have a lot in common today because Kim runs a book club or is involved in a book club. And Kim and I have actually done a wine and book pairing. Do you remember this, Kim? Years
I
ago
do.
with the Franklin Library. I think it was Bittersweet was the book.
It was
Am I
bittersweet
correct?
or sweet bitter, bittersweet.
Sweet bitter.
I forget what the actual title of the book was, but yeah, that was a few years ago, and I liked it so much that I actually had that as one of my book club choices for my own personal book club, and then I ended up bringing a whole bunch of the wines that were mentioned in the book, so I got to bring it to the next level, which was a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, and that was an easy book for us to do with the library because it had a lot of wine mentioned in it. So we just kind of used that. So Jennifer, if you can just give our listeners a kind of overview of what you do, how you do it, and then get them involved in your book and wine blog.
Wonderful. Thank you to both of you for having me here. It's a real honor to talk to your listeners today. I write a blog, as you mentioned, called Book-Worm, and the whole idea is to pair wine with literature. And it's not just fiction. I do some nonfiction. I'm considering doing a graphic novel or a cookbook, done some poetry. Really, any book that you enjoy, I think, can be paired with wine. My basic approach for my blog is to read the book, take some notes, and write a short book review, and then use various cues that we can talk about as we go on, cues from the book to choose a wine that I think would complement the book nicely. I'll select the wine and then take tasting notes. So I write up tasting notes for each blog post. And then the funnest part, I think, might be the why it works, which is what I write at the end. And it sort of brings together the elements in the book and the elements in the wine that I think complement one another and hopefully kind of elevates the entire experience for people. I think what has been most fun for me has been sort of this process of discovery about how different wines can work with words. And always looking for something, creative and new. And I think, if people want to do this for themselves, one thing that I try to tell people is that really there's no one right answer. There are so many books, so many wines, and I think whatever pairing you find that really speaks to you, that resonates with you, is going to be a good one. I mean, a lot like pairing food and wine, we all have different preferences. And, I make suggestions, and I guess in the end, I hope that people enjoy them. But I always encourage people who read the blog to send me feedback, and maybe they find other wines that they enjoy. And I try to encourage them to send those selections my way too.
There are so many facets to your blog. I found myself as I was reading through a few of them, just seeing all of the different ways that you are able to incorporate language and your tasting notes and bringing all these things together. But what really struck me at the beginning was the diversity of both the books that you chose and then the wines that you chose to pair with those books. So not even so much how you came about pairing a particular wine with a particular book, but a lot of the wines that you recommend, I have never seen before and I have never tasted. And that takes a lot usually for me to run across something that that I am completely unfamiliar with. So I just thought it was so interesting that every single one of your blogs that I read, I learned something new, either about the book or about a particular wine that is out there in the world that I have never experienced. And maybe I want to go out and taste it now.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. I do try to be conscientious of putting new things in front of people if I can. I mean, that's what I enjoy both about reading and about wine. There's just so many choices. And of course, my stack of books, my to-read stack of books is about 20 books high, and I'll never get to every book that I want to read, just like I'll never get to every wine that I want to taste. But I guess this is my small attempt to make a little dent in those stacks.
I'm glad to hear you say that, Jennifer, about your stack of books, because every birthday or holiday, I'll make a list of books for my kids, and they always yell at me, well, you still have that stack of books in there you never touched, And unfortunately, I just read mostly wine books. And getting back to earlier, I messed up the book we did. It was sweet bitter. It wasn't bittersweet.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, so of course I messed it up. But a lot of times, as Kim was saying, when reading your blog, you show like the story of the book you tell, but then you tell the story of the wine, which I think is very special. Kim and I always talk about stories in wine and how it makes the wine just a special moment when you're drinking it. And it also showed you had a lot of wine knowledge. When you're tasting it, you're saying the acidity is plus minus this. And so can you tell our listeners what your background is with wine education?
Sure. I'm relatively new to wine education in, let's see, it would have been early 2023. I took the WSET 2, the Wine and Spirits Education Trust Level 2 class over, I think we did it over 2 or 3 weekends. But I took that class, and that's kind of where this idea started. I don't know how it kind of bubbled up into my brain, but what I realized when I took that class is I realized how much I didn't know. And as somebody who enjoys wine, just learning to be intentional was a big part of that class. And then understanding that the world of wine is just endless. So I then decided to jump on to level 3, which I did in the fall of 2023. So I completed WSET level 3 in November of 2023 and had a wonderful time doing that. I think what makes, for me, the education component really special is that there's a great group of people in the Twin Cities where I live in Minneapolis, St. Paul, who are really supportive of wine education. There's lots of tasting groups that you can get involved with, blind tastings, people set up informal tastings. And then the place where I took the actual classes, it's called France 44, and they are a wine and cheese shop, plus they have an educational arm. And they offer all kinds of classes that are less academic. You can take a rosé tasting class or bubbles for the holidays or wines of Northern Italy. So there's just a lot of opportunities, whether you're an enthusiast or, somebody who's in the industry.
It's always nice to hear about locations in other states and in other cities that do similar things to what we do, because my wine school kind of does similar things. So we do all the WSET classes here in Boston, but then fun classes too. And it's one of the nicest things about the job, I think, sometimes is when somebody starts a class or starts a certification, is not in the industry, they're not doing it to improve in work, but they're doing it from the love of wine. And then you really see those light bulbs go off in their eyes when when certain topics click or when something really starts to take a hold of your passion for the topic. And I love to hear about other schools that are doing similar things and can get that same reaction out of their students. So I really think that's wonderful.
Yeah, we the woman who teaches the bulk of the classes here is just wonderful, very engaging, and it's been we've had a very interesting mix of students in the class. People coming who are maybe working in the hospitality industry and maybe not specifically wine, but they just want to understand wine a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Folks like myself who are just enthusiasts, people who are retired and who are looking for something to do as they transition into a new phase of their lives. So it's been a lot of fun in that way. And I think, like you said, sometimes that light comes on. I still remember this experience, was in the WSET level 2 class where we were tasting through some whites and everybody was talking about Sauvignon Blanc and how they could smell this asparagus. I
Mhm.
could not smell it, could not smell it. And so finally, I tried one where it was very, very evident. And now I'm so excited that I can finally smell asparagus in wine, which maybe isn't the most pleasant flavor, but I was like, wow, it's there.
Yeah, every once in a while, I like to ask somebody about their aha moment. Like, what was your aha moment when you learned to taste wine and suddenly, like, all of the talk about descriptions suddenly makes sense? I
Right.
love yours. I think Sauvignon Blanc is actually a really good one to talk about because the aromas can be so forceful.
Yes.
Mine was a
Yes.
Cabernet Sauvignon was my aha moment. So I think it was sort of all part and parcel.
Yeah. It's just really fun when people talk about things and you finally experience it for yourself. It's enjoyable.
Jennifer, how has your wine education influenced like the wines in the book pairings? Do you now find yourself trying to seek out more unique wines than you may have in the past, or something more geeky now that you have more of an education in wine, or you just try to make it overall fun and not think of that geeky part of wine?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the overall emphasis is for it to be fun and to be a journey of discovery, I think. But the education component has helped me tremendously. I even feel like between WSET 2 and WSET 3, just spending those few more months studying, learning more about regions, learning more about grapes, climate, it's just helped so much. And I think some of it is just you can buy a bottle of wine and you can taste it with intention, and that is always enjoyable. But I think for me, the more I understand about the story behind that wine, who the producer might be, who the winemaker might be, what was the winemaker trying to achieve, why were the grapes picked when they were picked, what was the slope like on the hill where the grapes were growing, whatever, all these little details that, you don't realize there are so many decisions that go into a bottle of wine until you take some of these classes and you really, for me anyway, I really started to appreciate every little thing that goes into a bottle of wine. And I want to share that with people, just that enthusiasm to kind of let other people know, try this, it's wonderful. So the wine education has been key for me.
I think a lot of this comes back to, and we've spoken about this in previous shows, about emotion attached to, the particular story of a wine. But we've been talking recently also about like different sensory experiences around wine. And I think that talking to you today is actually a really nice segue from our previous show about neuromarketing. But both you and our previous guest have landed on this idea of how to involve kind of other senses in ways to talk about wine and ways to experience wine. And in this case, you're taking the personality of a book, let's say, and translating that into this sensory experience of tasting wine. And I know we mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, but can you go into a little bit about how you choose the wine and what it is about a particular book that kind of points you in the direction of, oh, this is maybe the type of wine that I want to be focusing on for this book?
Yeah, sure. I think as I read and, of course I take notes. So that's, the more academic part of it. But I'm also, as you said, you're involving your feelings too. How does this book make you feel? So I try to take note of all of those things. But I like to tell people when they're trying to pair wine and a book, different things in a book are going to strike each of us differently based on what we're bringing to that book. And so, for some people, you might read a book and wow, the character's personality really speaks to you. And so is there a way to take that personality and look for a wine that maybe has a similar personality? How would those two pair? Or, I read this book, North Woods, where the landscape and New England is where it took place. That was a huge part of the book. And so it just felt like you had to somehow use geography with your pairing. And a cooler climate, a place where there were seasons. It just, kind of called out for that to me. Trying to think of some other things, even just something as simple as a book's genre, a mystery, is there a wine that feels mysterious to you? And I did one where I was like, let's see if I can find a really complex wine, something that requires me to think about it a little bit, to really give this a good smell, swirl it, take some notes, try again, and just try to discover as much as you can in the wine. So I just think that every book probably has several pairings. I did one book where there were a lot of surprises in the book, a lot of twists and turns and things that were quite unexpected. And I paired it with a hybrid wine because, of course, in a lot of the W site classes, they're somewhat dismissive of hybrids and American hybrids in particular. And where I live in Minnesota, it's a cold climate. And really the only grapes that will grow here for making wine are hybrid wines. And there's some wonderful wines being made. That wasn't the case 10 or 15 years ago, but things are changing. Winemakers are learning to work with these grapes. And anyway, I was surprised by the quality of the wine. And so I thought that was a nice parallel. The book surprised me, and here's a wine that could potentially surprise somebody too.
I thought that was such a clever, creative pairing idea. I read that one. I was like,
Thank you.
That is so smart. I also really like hybrids. So I'm on team hybrid.
Yeah. And I have fun researching it. I learned so much when I was working on that blog post. And granted, I offer readers a couple of paragraphs. I don't want to bog people down with too much information, but just for myself, reading about the different hybrid wines, where they grow best, why they are bred to either be maybe cold hardy or disease resistant or whatever the case might be, just opened my eyes to a lot of new things too. So that's fun as well.
You're listening to The Wonderful World of Wine, and we are your hosts, Kim and Mark. We are supported by Franklin Public Radio, and you can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. For more information about Mark, please visit his website, franklinliquors.com. And for more information about myself and my classes, please go to commonwealthwineschool.com. And today we have a special guest, Jennifer Simonson, and you can find her blog, Book-Worm.blog. Welcome back, everyone. We are here with Jennifer Simonson, who is talking about her book blog and about pairing books and wine. And as I was listening to, some of the ways that you were describing your books and describing the wines, I wanted to assure our listeners that you don't write about wine books. So I think a lot of times on this show, we talk about books about wine, but there's very little wine in the books that you are reviewing. You kind of take this next step and do this really creative thing where you'll give a little bit of a synopsis of the book and then choose a creative wine that somehow mirrors some aspect of the book. And your blog is great because you break it down into 3 very manageable chunks of information. You talk about the book, and then you give us a tasting note for the wine, and then you tell us why. Why did you choose this wine to go with this book? And I think that is so illustrative of your thought process of why you chose one to go with the other. And it certainly made me think a lot about not only the book and the pairing, but also the bits of wine information that you put in that part of it is very educational. So I really like how you've kind of wrapped the whole thing up, and it helps that you are a good writer yourself. So it's very engaging. And every one that I read, I thought always gave me something new to learn.
Oh, well, thank you. That makes me feel really great that you are enjoying them. I don't write about wine. I use the wine books I have as my reference books. When I create my posts, I go to the experts for that. It's above my level of expertise at the moment. But yeah,
we all learn somewhere.
Right. I have a growing library.
You can't know it all. So it's good that there are resources for all of us when we sort of given the tough wine questions that somebody wants to know the answer to.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that makes wine so fun too and interesting is you can't know it all. I mean, I suppose there are a few people that the masters know it all, but people like myself don't. And it's just this continually evolving and exploratory process for me. And that is really enjoyable.
Jennifer, I want to talk a little bit more about, Kim was mentioning the stories. We talked earlier about the stories of when you tell the story of the book you read, you tell the story of the wine. How do you think that the experience of reading a book and then pairing with wine changes that? Does it change like the experience of the book of reading if you have that like perfect wine as you're reading it? I guess what I'm getting at, when you're reading the book, you're thinking of what wine you're going to tell people to pair with it. But when the reader reads the blog, I would assume they're drinking that wine with the book. So do you think their experience of reading is now elevated because of your recommendation more than when you read it?
I hope so. I guess, that's the goal. You're right. I read the book and look for my cues. What would I recommend to go with this particular book? I don't actually partake in the recommendation except separately. I drink the wine separately. But I do hope that people pair the two. And I suppose most of us would need several bottles of the wine to make it through the book. But personally, I enjoy my evening routine when I am winding down for the day is to pick up a book. In the winter, sit by the fireplace. In the summer, sit out on the patio and have a glass of wine with it. And generally, it's not the pairing that I've recommended because I'm working on that pairing, but having the two sensory things together, I think, does heighten your enjoyment of both. When I read, I'm paying attention, and and when I'm sipping wine at the same time, there's that heightened level of intentionality that kind of comes together there. I mean, it's a quiet time to sit and think about the book and the wine, and it's just a time to let the busyness of the day fall aside and enjoy two things that bring me a lot of pleasure in life. Did I answer your question, Mark? Maybe I didn't
yeah.
answer it well.
No. So I was, as you talk today, I keep thinking about, are you a Seinfeld fan at all, Jennifer?
Yeah, it's been a while since I've watched Seinfeld, but yes.
I'm thinking of the Kramer coffee table book, and my question to you would be on that. Would you ever consider writing a book about how to pair wines with a book? I think it would be like an interesting read for people who are in book clubs or have this idea but don't really know how to put two and two together, and just your whole theory of how you do it.
Yeah, I think that would be fun. It would probably be more like a booklet, maybe. I don't know if I could produce something too thick. But
with your
an
stories,
ebook.
you could do it.
It could be an ebook.
Yes. Yeah. I think it would be fun, though, to write about sort of how you do it, what approach you can take, and then maybe provide some examples. I mean, for me, the examples are where you can kind of see some of the concepts come alive, I guess. I'm trying to think of how I should phrase this. I don't know. I don't think that answered your question very good, Mark.
What you're doing is very unique. I mean, there's book clubs. I mean, Kim, when you have your book club, I'm not in a book club, so I'm not sure what people do. My whole idea is people give a book to read, and then you gather and you talk about it as you're drinking wine.
I
But
mostly drink wine in book clubs.
That is part of it. Ours is also sort of a food club. So we do food themes for each of our books as well. So sometimes there will be a wine theme, like Sweet Bitter had the wine theme, but we always have a food theme. So if it's set in I don't know, South Carolina, we'll do Southern food. Let's see, when we did The Women a couple of months ago, we did Vietnamese food. So things like that, we would do themes, and people have to get creative. But it's also well, I can't deep fry something at my friend's house, so what am I going to bring? So our next one is Jewish comfort food, and the book I'm doing in October is set in Mexico, so we're going to do Mexican food, that kind of a thing. But I think it is harder with wine. Even if you have a book that talks about wine a lot, you either have to focus, I feel like on the exact wines that are in the book, or you have to get creative. So I think the idea of being creative with sort of the feelings behind the wines instead of the actual wine that maybe is mentioned in a book is I think really opens up the ability to have a conversation about it. How this book make you feel. And so therefore we're talking about, well, this wine is making me feel this way, and kind of putting those two things together. So it's something that requires more thought, I think, and a little bit more creativity, but I think it can really lead to some interesting conversations. And we do try to discuss the book and not just get together and drink wine. So I think to have something that can lead to a little bit more conversation in any book club is a good thing.
Yeah, I think you did really sum it up nicely there, Kim. I mean, for me, both reading and tasting wine, drinking wine with your friends, with your family, it's about an exchange of ideas. I mean, we come together in book clubs because we want to talk about what we read. What were the ideas behind the story that sparked some emotion. And can we share that? And maybe we agree, maybe we disagree, maybe somebody has some new insight that you didn't have when you were reading that book. And the same happens when tasting wine. I think of like my blind tasting group that I meet with every other Sunday. It's so much fun to taste wine with other people because their palates are different. What they're more sensitive to is different than me. And somebody recognizes something in the wine that I don't, and then they mention it. And I'm like, oh yeah, I get that now. So it's just a great way to share our lived human experience, through books and wine.
That's such a nice parallel of discussing books with a group of people and then tasting wine together. I mean, those are two completely different and separate experiences, but I do see the common thread of you might not have noticed something, and you learn a whole lot more when you taste wine with other people than if you just sort of taste it at home by yourself. And there is value to tasting by yourself, but you get so much more out of it when you're with a group of people, which is why it's so valuable to have, in-person classes where you've got a dozen people and you're all sitting around tasting the exact same wine and then talking about it and developing that language. And this is something that you mentioned at the very beginning of our show about when you take these classes, you have to be thoughtful and you have to really put effort into figuring out how to assess the wine and what you're tasting in the wine. And I think when you read a book with the focus of, I have to discuss this with my book club, you also have to have that same sort of focus. And I forget the word that you used. I think it was intention. So tasting wine with intention or reading your book with intention, and then you put it all together. And I think it really just ups the experience all across the board.
Yeah. I think for me, primarily I read for entertainment, and I drink wine for entertainment as well, I guess. But they're both transportive experiences. Where does a wine take you? For me, it takes me beyond my kitchen table generally, and a book certainly takes you to other places too. And I just think they go so wonderfully together.
Every once in a while, we come back to this idea of that wine has romance. Sort of this romantic idea of wine, and it's where it's grown, and you see the fields and blah, 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 blah. But this is where the actual romance of wine is, I feel like. The ways that we can taste it and it makes us think of different things in different places, and then having that experience of tasting that alongside somebody else and having a conversation about it. I think that's where the emotion of having a good glass of wine really is. It's not necessarily about how beautiful is the vineyard, or how long has the winemaking family been around, but how are we experiencing it?
Yeah, the communal aspect of
totally
drinking wine. And, it's like, think of when you've had your best conversations. I mean, they're almost always around a table with a bottle or two or three of wine open. You're sharing all of it, the flavors, the food, most likely, the conversation. Yeah, it's a special thing.
I'm glad too that you mentioned ideas, and because when I was thinking of pairing a book with a wine, and we did this together, Kim, it was just because they mentioned that wine in the book. Mm-hmm. But you opened up my eyes, and I'm sure a lot of listeners have given them ideas of how to pair a wine with a book. And I think in your article you had mentioned it could be by genre, but about the author, the author's intent. And I know a few times you go into the story of the winemakers being similar to the stories of the people in the book. So I think you've really put a lot of more ideas in my head of when I'm reading a book, how I can think about pairing it with a wine. And I hope the listeners take that to heart next time they're shopping for a book or a wine. I think it's great.
Well, I like to think of winemakers and the people who tend to the vineyards too. I mean, they're storytellers in a way as well. And so for me, there's a lot to be gained by understanding a little bit of their perspective. I'd love to go meet them all and pick their brains, but I find what I can on the internet and go with that.
Yeah, no, I think Kim and we hear these stories all the time when we meet people, and it makes me want to now think of when I'm reading a book about the story I heard from a winemaker and relate that to something. Unfortunately, I'll say it again, I read just wine books. I mean, I have read a few other things, but
Mark, you need to join Kim's book club.
Yeah,
we have a wait list. Sorry,
I don't know. Too much romance for me.
Oh my goodness!
But I was just reading the story about New England rock walls, so I could do like Riesling or something like that.
Ooh.
With that. So
Yeah,
You know,
something with some
Absolutely.
minerality.
yeah, see, it all
Rock
works.
walls.
Yeah,
We have a lot of rock walls here in New England.
that's my reading.
That's fun. This was fun.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you both. This was a pleasure, and I'm so happy to hear that you found the blog and found it interesting and thought your
So
readers might
creative.
find it.
I was like, wow, this is so cool and not at all what I was expecting. Yeah. And I think it's really great how you take the idea of what the pairing is going to be and then you explain why, but then you give us information, and you present it in a way that it's not scary and it's a little snippet and it's not too long. And I think it's very, very well put together. I think people are going to learn a lot about wine and about these books from your blog.
Oh, that's great. My
And I
mother
can't
would
wait to
disagree
send
with
it.
you.
I can't wait to send it to my book club. Your mother would
Oh, good.
disagree. Why?
Oh,
Oh,
well,
mom.
because yes, I know, right? I'm like, my mom should be my biggest fan, but she always tells me that I write too much.
Oh,
Too long, didn't read.
yeah, sometimes. But
Oh,
like I was told the exact same thing today. It's like when you're talking about a topic and especially a wine topic and something that you know a lot about, you can just go on and on and on. And it's like somebody has to stop you or edit, because
well, when
I
you're
mean, I know that
passionate
I could
about
just
it,
go on and on and on. So,
well, you're a teacher. That's good. That's a good quality to have.
I suppose.
I thought all the wine information was great, and you could tell that your experience in wine because of the way you describe it. But I'm sure the people had the same view that read the book that enjoyed your commentary on the book and the story of the book. So
Yeah.
I think it was great, and it was just a pleasure to have you on, Jennifer. It's always fun when we can follow up, seeing an article and getting that person here on the show and telling our listeners their story. So we really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I had a wonderful time talking to both of you today.
Thank you for joining us today on The Wonderful World of Wine. We've been your hosts, Mark Lenzi and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. If you'd like more information about Kim, you can go to her website, commonwealthwineschool.com. For more information about myself, you can go to franklinliquors.com. Today's special guest, Jennifer Simonson. Her website is book-worm.blog, pairing wine with books. You can also sign up for her newsletter on that website. Our show is sponsored by Franklin Public Radio. All our past episodes are on SoundCloud and iTunes, and you can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. You can get all our past stories and everything we talk about here on the radio. Cheers.
Cheers.
Wine, wine, wine.